She claimed to be helping a patient, but I found her in another doctor's arms. You definitely didn't expect this. Ethan sat in his office, deeply engrossed in work. The dim light of the monitor illuminated his tired face, and behind him, a clock on the wall ticked away. It was nearly midnight. Alicia, his wife, was on another night shift at the hospital. It had become routine, and although Ethan couldn't say he liked it, he always tried to understand her demanding schedule. Her work was important, and he was proud of her. The evening's silence was suddenly interrupted by the ringing of his phone. Ethan flinched slightly in surprise. Who could be calling so late? He glanced at the screen. A number he didn't recognize. He picked up the phone. "Hello?" he asked, trying to hide his fatigue. A male voice came from the other end, tense but composed. "Is this Ethan, Alicia's husband?" "Yes, that's me. Who's asking?" Ethan frowned slightly. He didn't like strangers diving straight into personal matters. "My name won't mean anything to you, and it's better you don't know it. But I work at the hospital with your wife. I have something important you need to know." "I'm listening," Ethan replied, trying to stay calm, though his intuition told him this call would bring trouble. "I wouldn't interfere if I didn't think it was important. Your wife may not always be honest with you about her night shifts. There are things you might want to look into." Ethan froze. His heart skipped a beat. He didn't immediately know how to react. "What are you trying to say?" His voice remained steady, though he burned inside. "Pay more attention to what she's doing. I can't say more, but open your eyes. That's all I can tell you. Don't try to find me." The call ended. Ethan remained seated, holding the phone in his hands. His thoughts were scattered, like puzzle pieces he struggled to piece together. Who was that? Why had this man decided to call him? Alicia had always been honest. Or had she? He tried to find a logical explanation for the call, but a sense of unease began creeping into his mind. The next morning, Alicia behaved as usual, calm, attentive, smiling. She made coffee, put on her familiar medical coat, and talked about the day ahead. But now Ethan looked at her differently. He searched for signs, something that could confirm or refute the stranger's words. "You look amazing today," he remarked, watching as she applied a light layer of makeup. "Oh, thank you," she replied, not looking up from the mirror. "We have an important day ahead. A new patient, a complicated case. I need to be at my best." Her words sounded natural, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that there was something hidden in her tone. "And you, love? How's your project?" she asked, sitting next to him for a quick coffee. "Everything's fine," he replied curtly. "Just a bit more work to do, but I'm managing." She nodded, seemingly unaware of his changed mood. She kissed him on the cheek, put on her coat, and left with her usual smile. But at the door, she paused for a moment. "Don't wait up for me. It might be late," she said before disappearing out the door. Ethan watched her go, then walked to the window to see her get into her car. Her behavior was ordinary, but now every move seemed suspicious. He tried to tell himself it was all in his imagination, but the unease had already taken hold of his thoughts. He returned to his office but couldn't focus on work. The anonymous call haunted him. Why now? Why had the stranger said that? To find out, he decided to act. He started with small things, checking her calendar, cross-referencing the dates of her night shifts. Nothing suspicious. But that didn't stop him. In the evening, when Alicia was supposed to be working, Ethan drove to the hospital. He parked nearby and waited. His heart beat faster than usual. He felt ridiculous, like a spy in his own marriage, but he couldn't leave the matter unresolved. An hour later, the hospital doors opened. Ethan saw her. She was walking with a man, tall, in a medical coat, with an overly bright smile. They walked side by side, laughing slightly, before disappearing around the corner of the building. Ethan watched them, his heart filling with anger and disappointment. Who was he? And why had she never mentioned him? "You have liver issues due to excessive energy drink consumption. It's a common problem among young professionals," she explained, looking at him attentively. Ethan was surprised by how confident she was, and it immediately earned his respect. "So, what do I do now? Quit drinking them?" He tried to joke. "That's not a question, Mr. Smith," she replied seriously. "You don't just need to quit energy drinks. If you keep this pace, it could lead to irreversible consequences. I'll prescribe treatment, but your cooperation will be essential. Are you ready to change your lifestyle? Ethan hesitated. He knew she was right, but he felt deeply tied to his hectic schedule. Yet there was something in her eyes that made him agree. All right, I'm willing to try, he said. Over the next few days, Alicia regularly checked in on him, monitoring his condition. She didn't just perform her duties. She also talked with him about life, work, and even his startup. Why do you work so hard? She asked one evening, sitting beside his bed and reviewing his tests. I want to create something meaningful, Ethan said, staring at the ceiling. Something that changes the world. But is it worth your health? She asked, looking up at him. The question caught him off guard. He had never thought about it before. Their conversations became more than just discussions about treatment. They were moments when he started to reevaluate his life. When Ethan was discharged, he felt that something had changed. Alicia had given him more than just a prescription. She had sparked a desire to change himself. Thank you, doctor, he said as he bid her goodbye. Just take care of yourself, she replied with a smile. A few weeks later, he found her on social media and worked up the courage to message her. Their first date was simple. They met at a small cafe near the hospital. She spoke about her work, and he shared his ideas. Their conversation was easy and natural. A year later, they were married, and their life seemed perfect. But now, 5 years later, those ideals had begun to crack. Ethan wondered if their feelings had only been a fleeting emotion. Could he give her what she truly wanted? A family? And was he ready to change his priorities for their future? Alicia had been staying late at work more frequently. She explained it as staff shortages, constant crises at the hospital, and the need to cover night shifts. At first, Ethan accepted it. After all, doctors were always busy. But with each passing day, her excuses sounded less convincing. Sorry, love, I'll be late again tonight, she said that evening as she left the house. A new patient is in critical condition. I just can't leave my colleagues. All right, Alicia, Ethan replied with a forced smile. But please take care of yourself. You look exhausted. It's fine, don't worry, she reassured him, hugging him before leaving. Ethan tried to believe her. He knew that hospitals could be unforgiving places with endless challenges. But something in her voice felt different, and it made him suspicious. That evening, he remembered the strange handkerchief again. The masculine scent lingering on the fabric seemed too odd for a typical patient. After hours of contemplation, Ethan decided to confront Alicia directly about it. The next morning, when she returned home, he sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. Alicia, he began, trying to speak calmly. I need to ask you something. What's wrong? She looked at him with slight concern. I found a handkerchief at home that I don't recognize. It smells like men's cologne. Can you explain where it came from? Alicia paused for a few seconds, as if considering her response. Then she sat down across from him. It's a patient's, she said, looking him straight in the eyes. One of our older patients always carries handkerchiefs like that. He dropped it in the hallway, and I accidentally brought it home while gathering my things. I meant to return it but forgot. I'm sorry if it confused you. Her answer sounded logical, but something in her gaze made Ethan doubt her. Then I suppose you'll return it soon, right? He asked, trying to conceal his suspicions. Of course, she nodded. I'll take it back tomorrow at work. Ethan pretended to believe her, but his doubts only grew stronger. He knew he couldn't just let the situation go. That evening, when Alicia left for her night shift, Ethan sat at his computer, feeling a growing sense of unease. He couldn't hold back any longer. Opening a chat window with an AI assistant, he decided to describe his situation. My wife has been acting strangely lately, he typed. She's staying late at work. Her excuses seem contrived. I found a man's handkerchief at home, and her explanation didn't convince me. Is this normal? The algorithm quickly responded. Based on your description, your wife's behavior appears suspicious. It is recommended to observe the situation more closely. There is a possibility she is hiding something. Those words hit him like a punch to the chest, while Ethan had already suspected the same. Seeing it written by an external source made it even more painful. He closed the laptop and buried his head in his hands. With each passing day, his anxiety only grew. Unable to handle it all on his own, Ethan secretly returned to an old habit, drinking energy drinks. At first, it was 1 can, then 2, and eventually more. He hid them in cupboards and threw the empty cans in a neighbor's trash bin to avoid raising Alicia's suspicions. The energy drinks gave him temporary relief, but over time, his condition worsened. He felt exhausted even though he slept much more. The pain in his side, which he had once managed to ignore, began to return. But worst of all, he felt incredibly alone. One morning, when Alicia came home from another shift, she found him sitting in the living room, staring blankly. "Ethan, are you okay?" she asked, noticing his downcast state. "Yeah, just a bit tired," he replied shortly, avoiding her gaze. Alicia looked too exhausted to press further and went to the bedroom. But inside, Ethan felt like he was on the verge of breaking. "I have to find out the truth," he thought. But was he ready to face it? Later that day, Alicia came home after another night shift. She looked tired, but a mysterious smile played on her lips. Dropping her bag in the hallway, she approached Ethan, who was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. "We have a new doctor in the department," she said, sitting beside him. "His name is Dr. Trevor, a very experienced surgeon, and he seems to have an incredible sense of humor." Ethan glanced up from his cup, catching the faintest hint of admiration in her voice. "I'm glad you've got a new colleague. You've always said the department was understaffed," he replied, trying to sound casual. Alicia nodded, continuing to talk about Trevor, how quickly he was fitting in, how he inspired everyone with his energy. Ethan listened, but his mind was racing, analyzing every word. "By the way, Trevor's hosting a little get-together for the team," she suddenly said. "It's going to be at his house. Just a way to get to know everyone outside of work. I'm planning to go. You don't mind, do you?" "Of course not," Ethan replied, then added, feigning nonchalance. "Can I come with you?" Alicia hesitated. You know, it's more of a work thing. Everyone there will be from the hospital. Trevor wants it to be a casual environment where people can feel comfortable." Those words stuck in Ethan's mind. He tried not to show how much they bothered him, but something about the situation didn't sit right. "All right, if it's just for you guys," he said, masking his true feelings. Things got stranger the next day. Alicia asked for money to buy a new dress. "I want to look nice for the gathering. The women in my department always dress so stylishly, and I don't have anything that really stands out," she explained. Ethan agreed, and they went shopping together. In the women's clothing section, he watched as Alicia carefully selected a dress. She chose an elegant black dress that fit her perfectly, highlighting her figure. But then, as they passed the lingerie section, she stopped, browsing the luxurious selection. Ethan couldn't help but ask, "Why do you need new lingerie?" he asked, trying to keep his tone calm. Alicia smiled and looked at him playfully. "It's for you, darling," she said. "Don't you like it when I look good?" This response eased him slightly, but his suspicions didn't go away. When they returned home, Alicia went straight to the bedroom to try on her new outfit. She emerged in the black dress, her makeup done, with a hairstyle she rarely wore. She looked stunning, but it only made Ethan feel worse. "You look amazing," he said. "But maybe you could stay home? We could spend the evening together, watch a movie like we used to." Alicia just laughed. "Ethan, I already promised. Don't worry, it's just for a few hours." She grabbed her purse and left, leaving him alone. Ethan sat in the living room, feeling a growing pain in his chest. His suspicions had become unbearable. He pulled out a hidden can of energy drink from the drawer and downed it in one go. It brought temporary relief, but the pain in his liver began to resurface. Sitting in the darkness, Ethan felt like his world was starting to crumble. Was it all just his jealousy? Or was he truly losing Alicia? Despite his sadness, Ethan wanted to relax. After working hard for days, he decided to play video games. Immersing himself in the game calmed him down, and he lost track of time. But Alicia still hadn't returned home. While Ethan played and felt momentarily at peace, his phone suddenly rang. An anonymous caller. At first, he felt scared, not knowing what to expect anymore. Ethan woke up the next morning, feeling heavy in both body and mind, as the previous night's thoughts returned to haunt him. His head was still foggy. He had barely slept after speaking to the anonymous caller. The rough voice that had spoken to him about Alicia echoed in his mind. Every word, every detail, left a dark, doubtful mark on his heart. Alicia was already in the kitchen, frying eggs and making coffee. She looked as she always did, beautiful, calm, happy. When she noticed Ethan come out of the room, her face lit up with tenderness. "Good morning. How are you?" she asked, smiling. Ethan simply nodded and sat down at the table. His gaze was focused, and though he tried to appear calm, a storm of emotions raged inside him. He couldn't shake what he had heard the day before. The call, the anonymous voice, and its words about Alicia. How had he not noticed anything suspicious in her behavior? Was it true? Or could it all have been a fabrication? "How was your evening at Trevor's?" Ethan asked quietly, watching her. Alicia sat down next to him and began to talk. She described the lively atmosphere, how fun it had been, how her colleagues laughed, and how Trevor, as always, looked fantastic. But Ethan noticed small details that stuck in his mind. Her movements were too light, her eyes somewhat distant. She seemed to sense his tension, but tried not to show it. "Trevor organized everything so well," she continued, anticipating his silent questions. "And even after everyone left, he invited me to stay a little longer. We talked about various topics, just casual things. You know, he's very smart, and we discussed a lot. It was nice." Ethan felt his heart clench at her words. She had stayed after everyone else had left? For what? What could they have discussed alone? His mind raced. What did he really know about Trevor? What did he truly know about Alicia? "Did you have a good time?" Ethan asked, trying to mask his unease. "Yes, very much," she replied without hesitation. "It was such a wonderful party. I'm really grateful to Trevor for inviting me." Ethan felt drained. He began to question whether he could still trust her, whether their relationship was still something he could believe in. Was it just an innocent party, or was he losing his wife? What had he missed? Throughout the day, Ethan kept to himself, silently observing Alicia. He noticed how she came home late at night, how her phone rang repeatedly, and how she avoided his gaze when he asked her certain questions. She had become more withdrawn and evasive. Even her smile was no longer as genuine as it once was. Alicia noticed the change in his mood, but chose not to mention it, assuming Ethan was simply overworked. She even suggested they go for a walk together, but Ethan couldn't hold it in anymore and decided to do what he had long wanted to do. He decided to uncover the truth. When Alicia left for the store, Ethan stayed home and began searching through her phone. He didn't want to invade her privacy, but he felt it was the only way to find peace. He opened her messages, call history, and even some photos, including ones from the party with Trevor. But he found nothing suspicious. All her messages seemed innocent, and there was nothing to fuel his deeper suspicions. Then he decided to take a different approach. He remembered the anonymous caller whose calls had been haunting him. Maybe this person knew more? Perhaps it wasn't just a random call, but someone who actually had information Ethan needed. Ethan decided to contact the man who had called him. He found the number, bypassed the carrier's system, and called back. This time, he was prepared for what he might hear. "Hello," Ethan said as he heard the same rough voice again. "How did you get my number?" the caller asked, surprised. "I want to know the truth," Ethan said through gritted teeth. "What do you know about Alicia and Trevor?" The voice on the other end didn't respond immediately, but then began speaking slowly. "Trevor isn't who he seems to be. He has his way, and if you think your wife is innocent, you're gravely mistaken." Ethan felt his heart tighten. Those words were the final straw. He had to uncover the truth, even if it hurt. Ethan stood still, his heart pounding faster with every word from the anonymous caller. "If you stop being blind, you'll see it all for yourself." Those words echoed in his mind like a boomerang. He didn't fully understand what the man meant, but something told him that the truth, however painful, would soon come to light. Ethan felt the tension inside him becoming unbearable. He realized that this time, he couldn't avoid it. He had to find out everything, even if it changed his life forever. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a dull ache in his chest. He knew nothing had changed. Everything was still the same. Yet the world around him seemed to spin differently. Alicia was already in the kitchen, making breakfast, and everything looked as usual, as though nothing had happened. "Good morning," she said, smiling at him. Ethan responded with a blank stare, trying to hide his emotions. He didn't know what to do. He felt a heavy shadow looming over him. He decided not to mention the anonymous call, but was certain something was off. Alicia was acting strangely. She was more meticulous about her appearance, paid more attention to details, and even looked different. Her mannerisms had changed. Ethan noticed but didn't let his thoughts run wild. She began avoiding conversations, becoming less open with each passing day. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Alicia glanced at him and noticed his concern. She turned her gaze away and, as if trying to dodge his question, said, "Yeah, I'm just running late. I need to go quickly." Ethan felt his doubts solidify into certainty. Something wasn't right. His wife was hiding something, and every move she made seemed suspicious. He couldn't ignore it anymore. "You don't seem okay," Alicia said, noticing his mood. "What's wrong? Why are you so serious?" Ethan hesitated, searching for words. He tried to stay composed but couldn't hide his inner tension. "I'm not feeling great," he said. "My liver hurts again." Alicia looked at him skeptically, as if doubting his words. "Your liver? Really?" She smiled, a hint of irony in her voice. "You're just overworked. You always come up with problems when you don't want to talk about something." Her words stung, but Ethan said nothing. He didn't want to argue, though her comments hurt him more than he wanted to admit. He decided to keep quiet. Alicia quickly got dressed and left for her night shift, leaving Ethan alone in the empty house. Ethan sat on the couch, bewildered. Something wasn't right. Something clearly didn't add up. His liver excuse felt like a weak attempt to deflect her suspicion, but he couldn't keep living like this. He needed answers. He decided to act. He wouldn't stop now. Ethan got dressed and left the house, heading toward the hospital. He was certain this night would reveal more than any other. If Alicia was really working this shift, he needed to know why she was away for so long. When he arrived at the hospital, he parked a distance away and started watching. He didn't know what to expect, but the longer he waited, the more he felt his intuition was right. And then, after a few minutes, he saw Alicia leave the hospital building. But she didn't head to her car. Instead, she approached Trevor's car. Ethan couldn't believe his eyes. He stood, hidden in the darkness, watching as Alicia got into Trevor's car, and the two of them drove off toward an unfamiliar destination. He was in shock. His heart pounded so hard that it felt like the entire world could hear it. He struggled to process what he had just witnessed. Ethan stayed in place, paralyzed by disbelief. He waited a few more minutes, and once he was sure they were far away, he got into his car and drove home. Every step of his life now felt unnatural. He didn't know what to do with this truth, but knew he could no longer remain in the shadow of uncertainty. Back home, Ethan began to cry. It wasn't just pain. It was utter disappointment. He felt his life falling apart piece by piece. He went to the fridge and grabbed the energy drinks he usually kept hidden for moments like this. He opened a can, took a few gulps, and his body filled with tired energy again. But it couldn't change what had happened. He didn't know how to move forward. Ethan woke up with a pounding headache. His eyes hadn't adjusted to the bright light flooding the room. For the first few seconds, he didn't know where he was, and his breathing was heavy, as though he had just run a marathon. He remembered the night, the energy drinks, the tension, and the fear of what he had seen. But now his body refused to cooperate. Rising to his feet, Ethan felt his head spinning and realized he wasn't at home. He was in a hospital. His gaze immediately landed on Alicia, who was standing next to his bed. She looked nervous and slightly irritated. Ethan, still in a daze, struggled to focus on her as she stared back at him. "Are you a child?" Alicia said, sighing. "How could you do this? How many times have I told you not to drink energy drinks in such quantities? You're killing yourself this way." Ethan sat, holding his head in his hands, his memory replaying all the moments from the night when he felt so powerless and broken. He didn't even remember how he ended up here, but everything seemed tied to what he had seen and heard. Alicia was clearly worried, but Ethan felt that something wasn't right. He couldn't ignore what had happened. "I'm sorry, I couldn't handle it," he murmured, feeling disappointed in himself. I don't know what came over me. It's all because I can't figure out what's happening between us, between you and Trevor. Alicia raised her eyebrows slightly, looking at him with curiosity. Trevor? She asked, trying to mask a trace of emotion. Trevor is just a colleague, Ethan. You know that. What are you imagining? Ethan was breathing heavily, trying to calm his nerves. His emotions hadn't settled yet, and he needed to voice what had been tormenting him for so long. An anonymous caller reached out to me, he said quietly, glancing at Alicia, and he told me he saw you with Trevor at night. And I didn't know what to think. That's why I acted this way, he added, unable to withstand the pressure. Alicia was silent for a moment. She didn't look surprised, and her expression remained composed. Ethan studied her reaction, and though her words sounded convincing, something in his subconscious wouldn't let him fully trust her. He wanted to believe her, but her explanations seemed too convenient, even if she was trying to be sincere. And what did this anonymous person say? She asked, slightly flustered. He's lying to you. Trevor is just a colleague, you know that? All of this is just your suspicions. You've imagined something without any proof. Ethan looked into her eyes, and although she tried to appear calm, he saw a hint of unease. Perhaps she truly hadn't betrayed him, but the doubt growing in his heart wouldn't fade. He didn't know if he could trust her after everything that had happened, but her sincerity in that moment gave him a glimmer of hope. Could it really just be his paranoia? Ethan began, trying to reach a logical conclusion. I don't know why all of this is tormenting me so much. I just feel like something isn't right, and I can't ignore it. I want to know the truth. Alicia sighed deeply, her tone softening. Ethan, I understand this is hard for you, but you can't let it eat at you like this. Trevor is truly just a colleague, and there's nothing more between us. I was with him for work, nothing else. Whatever that caller told you, it doesn't make any sense. Ethan sat and listened, trying to weigh every word. And though he believed she was trying to tell the truth, an inner voice kept whispering that there was more to the story. But he couldn't keep fighting himself and all his doubts. Fine, he replied, looking at her with pain in his eyes. I'll believe you. But what now? How can I stay calm after everything that's happened? Alicia sighed and gently placed her hand on his, trying to comfort him. Maybe you should stay here for a few more days, she said. I'll be here for you. We'll figure everything out. I need you, Ethan. Ethan felt a sense of relief from her words. He truly wanted her to be by his side, for everything to go back to how it was. He thought that a few more days in the hospital might help him sort through all of this and bring peace back to his soul. But, as it turned out, he was wrong. Nothing was as he expected. Each day spent in the hospital became harder and harder for him. Alicia spent more and more time at work, and her promises to stay close seemed less and less credible. Ethan understood she was busy, and though she kept saying everything would be fine, he felt the distance between them growing every day. He increasingly realized that her promises might just be words, hiding another reality. This deepened his doubts even more. Ethan stayed in the hospital, even though he was feeling much better, deciding to remain for a few more days. He missed Alicia and wanted to see how she behaved during her night shifts. They rarely spent time together lately, and Ethan began noticing that her attention often seemed focused on something, or someone else. It unsettled him. Late at night, when most patients were asleep and the medical staff were attending to their duties, Ethan decided to quietly leave his room and walk the hospital corridors. He tried to remain unnoticed, hoping to learn more about what Alicia was doing while he stayed in the hospital. He reasoned that if she was with Trevor again, he would see it and perhaps finally understand what was truly happening. Ethan moved silently through the corridor, his footsteps echoing faintly in the empty spaces. He peeked into several rooms, searching for Alicia. His heart beat faster with tension. He could hear the soft hum of medical equipment and the voices of staff, but Alicia was nowhere to be found. Ethan grew increasingly anxious and decided to go further. Finally, he spotted Trevor. The man stood near one of the rooms, speaking with another nurse. Ethan didn't know if Trevor would believe him if he claimed he was just looking for his wife, but he decided to approach anyway. He moved toward him, trying to remain composed. "Hey, Trevor," Ethan said. addressing the man and attempting to control his nervousness. Alicia has told me a lot about you. Trevor shrugged, offering a slight smile. He seemed calm, neither surprised nor nervous about running into Ethan. This struck Ethan as odd. He had expected Trevor to be more reserved. She's a good person, Trevor said. We work together, nothing more. Ethan was taken aback, unsure whether to believe Trevor's words. He had no evidence to confirm that Trevor and Alicia were merely colleagues. On the other hand, Trevor appeared genuine. Perhaps it really was just a professional relationship, though Ethan's heart remained plagued with doubt. I'm just concerned, Ethan replied, trying to keep his tone steady. She talks about your work together often. Yes, we work together. That's all, Trevor repeated, though this time he seemed slightly uncomfortable. Well, I should go. There are still things I need to check on. Ethan nodded, silently watching Trevor walk down the corridor. He didn't press further, as it seemed unlikely he would get clearer answers. Resolving to continue looking for Alicia, Ethan's heart was torn between suspicion and uncertainty. Ethan calmly walked through the corridor, trying to piece together what was happening. An uneasy feeling gnawed at him. Something about Alicia and Trevor felt off, but he couldn't substantiate it with facts. He peeked into several rooms, but couldn't find Alicia. Finally, Ethan noticed a door at the end of the corridor. It looked like any other hospital door, but he felt an intuitive suspicion. Approaching quietly, he tried the handle. It didn't budge, but he heard voices inside. Alicia's voice was unmistakable, but there was another man with her. Ethan froze. His heart clenched as he realized the man wasn't Trevor. The voices emanating from behind the door carried a warmth and intimacy that struck him deeply. He heard Alicia's laughter, followed by the man's gentle, tender tone. Ethan couldn't take it. Standing outside the door, feeling betrayed, Ethan fought to stay still. Emotions churned inside him: shock, anger, and heartbreak. He couldn't fathom that this was happening with the woman he loved and trusted so deeply. He didn't know what to do next. What would he say? How should he react to what he had just overheard? His mind raced through scenarios, but none of them felt right. Ethan turned and quickly walked back down the corridor. A cold wave of bitterness swept over him. All his hopes of rebuilding trust with Alicia shattered against the harsh reality. Now, he didn't know whether to stay in the hospital or head home to avoid seeing more. Anxiety swelled in his chest. He couldn't endure this uncertainty any longer. The pain was unbearable, and he had no idea how to move forward. Standing in the corridor, Ethan's heart pounded as anger and disappointment consumed him. Yet, he needed to uncover the truth. He couldn't leave this unresolved. Was Alicia truly betraying him? And who was the anonymous caller who had told him about her connections with other men? Taking steady breaths, Ethan tried to gather his thoughts. Leaving the hospital ward, he pulled out his phone. He couldn't wait any longer. He knew the anonymous caller's number was still in his contacts and decided to call him. Perhaps this would provide more answers than what he had just experienced at the hospital. Ethan dialed the anonymous number, holding the phone tightly, ready for whatever might happen next. His heart raced, unsure of what to expect but desperate to hear answers, even if they would destroy everything he had tried to preserve in his family. As the call connected, Ethan walked down the corridor, listening for a ringtone. His pulse quickened with every step. He reached the end of the hallway, where he had overheard Alicia and the unknown man. The door to the room was now closed. Suddenly, a man stepped out of the room. He was tall and muscular, dressed in a hospital gown that suggested he was a patient, but his commanding presence made Ethan doubt this. The man exuded confidence and strength, his movements deliberate and intimidating. Ethan's breath caught when the man's phone rang. It was the same ringtone he had just heard through the call. The man answered the phone, and Ethan recognized the voice immediately. It was the anonymous caller. The revelation hit Ethan like a freight train. This man was the anonymous caller, the one who had been feeding him cryptic information about Alicia's supposed betrayal. And now it was clear. This man wasn't just a random informant. He was intimately involved. Ethan quietly stepped back, leaning against the wall, trying to remain unseen. He listened intently, his heart pounding in his ears. The man's voice was calm and confident, as though nothing was amiss. Ethan's nerves frayed further. Unable to take it any longer, Ethan ended the call and clenched his phone in his hand. His mind spun in chaos. On one hand, the situation now seemed painfully clear. On the other, he didn't know how to handle this truth. Should he confront Alicia? Or was it better to stay silent, let it all go, and try to move on? Ethan stood there, paralyzed by indecision, his world crumbling around him. The line between truth and lies had blurred beyond recognition, and he was left to decide how to rebuild or abandon the life he thought he knew. Ethan walked back to his hospital room, barely conscious of his steps. Two questions echoed in his mind. Why is Alicia doing this? And what should I do next? He couldn't find the answers, but it was clear his life would never be the same. He didn't know if he even wanted to see Alicia after everything he had uncovered. Lying on the bed, Ethan closed his eyes, but sleep eluded him. He felt lost. All these days he had spent trying to understand why his wife was acting the way she was. All his efforts to rebuild trust now seemed futile. He felt betrayed, not just because Alicia had been with someone else, but because he had been blind to the signs. He replayed the scene with the man he had seen at the hospital. That man was strong and confident, and Ethan knew it wasn't just a random encounter. Alicia clearly knew him better than just as a patient, and the anonymous caller's voice confirmed it. Ethan could no longer deny it. He needed to decide what to do next. Was it worth fighting for the relationship, or was it time to close this chapter and move on? Ethan couldn't make up his mind. The image of Alicia with that man replayed in his mind over and over, offering no answers. One thing was certain. He couldn't stay indifferent. Their relationship needed resolution, and he had to make a decision. But what? Ethan slowly walked through the door of his home, feeling the cold autumn wind seeping through the window cracks. He had been discharged from the hospital, and though he felt better physically, his mind was still in turmoil. Alicia walked beside him, her hand intertwined with his, and though he could feel her warmth, it brought him no peace. He knew she was betraying him. Every glance, every movement, even her smallest words seemed like lies. Yet he wasn't ready to let go of what once meant everything to him. Ethan tried convincing himself that there was still a chance to fix things, that maybe it was all a misunderstanding. But deep down, he felt his uncertainty growing. He decided he would give her one last chance. If he found any further proof of her betrayal, he would end it immediately. For now, he was willing to try without revealing what he had learned at the hospital. Part of him wanted to confront her with the truth, but another part feared losing her completely. As time passed, life seemed to return to its usual rhythm. Yet Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He observed her closely, but Alicia remained as gentle and caring as ever. He tried convincing himself his suspicions were baseless. They spent time together, laughing and talking, but it wasn't the same as before. An emptiness lingered in his heart that he couldn't fill, and though he had evidence of her betrayal, he tried to ignore it, hoping there was still something left to salvage. One day, a large bouquet of flowers arrived at their house. Huge, vibrant roses and orchids were paired with expensive chocolates. Ethan was surprised to see the gift. It was unexpected. His eyes immediately fell on Alicia, who approached the bouquet, clearly surprised herself. "Wow, what a gift," she said, gently touching the flowers. Ethan stood nearby, unsure of what it meant. Something felt off. It was too sudden. He glanced at Alicia, but she seemed calm, as if nothing unusual had happened. She picked up the note attached to the bouquet and quickly read it. Ethan watched her expression closely, but his instincts told him something wasn't right. Alicia looked at the note and smiled, but her smile was cold, the kind she used when trying to hide her emotions. "Thank you for the nights you spent with me. You healed me," she read aloud, her voice as calm as ever. Ethan frowned, feeling a cold, unpleasant sensation creep into his chest. Those words, they made no sense unless they were connected to someone else. Ethan couldn't be mistaken. This wasn't just a random note. Someone had written it specifically for Alicia. And who sent this? Ethan asked quietly, trying not to sound too probing, though his heart was already filled with anxiety. Alicia looked at him, her gaze steady, even slightly confused. "It's probably just a patient. I don't know who it could be, she said, brushing it off. It's just a thank you for my help. I don't even remember who I helped yesterday. Ethan couldn't believe her words. A sharp pain clenched his chest. Every response she gave felt more distant, more detached. What was she hiding? And why couldn't she at least be honest with him? His thoughts kept returning to the hospital, to the moment he learned about her connections with other men. The bouquet became yet another confirmation that things weren't as he wanted to believe. This isn't just a patient, he muttered under his breath, though he didn't say it aloud. He didn't know what to do, what to say, how to go on with Alicia. All his convictions were beginning to crumble, and he didn't know if there was any point in continuing this charade. Alicia placed the note back in the envelope and then smiled softly at Ethan, though the smile felt forced. Don't worry, it's just a gift from a patient, she said again, as if trying to reassure him. Ethan didn't respond. He simply stared at her in silence, unsure of what to say. His thoughts ricocheted from one idea to another, and he felt drained. On one hand, he didn't want to believe Alicia was betraying him. On the other, every gesture, every word she spoke, reminded him that he was just a part of her game. Ethan turned away and walked to his room, leaving Alicia alone. He knew that if he didn't take steps now, everything would lose its meaning. But he wasn't ready to confront her. His mind was clouded with disappointment, and he no longer knew if he even wanted to keep fighting. The night was unnervingly silent. Ethan lay in bed, unable to sleep. Anxiety and pain consumed his thoughts. Every glance at Alicia, every word she spoke felt like a lie. He couldn't shake the memory of that moment at the hospital, hearing the voice on the phone and then seeing that man outside her room. It wasn't a coincidence, it was a sign. The more Ethan thought about it, the more convinced he became that she was betraying him. She had lied to him, and he could no longer believe her words. His unease pushed him to make a decision that would change his life forever. He decided to go to the hospital where Alicia worked. It was late at night, and Ethan knew she would be there. He got into his car, his hands trembling from nerves. Every move was filled with determination and pain, but he was ready to uncover the truth. Driving through the quiet streets, Ethan pulled up near the hospital and quietly approached the building. Memories of all the times Alicia had spoken about her work, her passion for helping people, flooded his mind. Now, he realized it had all been a facade. Her words and actions no longer mattered to him. He was determined to see what he feared, but had long suspected deep in his heart. As he approached the hospital, his heart raced. He saw dimly lit windows and empty corridors. Opening the door carefully, he stepped inside, trying to remain unnoticed. His heart pounded in his chest, and every step felt unnaturally loud. He wasn't sure what he was looking for, but his intuition told him that tonight, he would finally learn the truth. Ethan wandered through the hospital corridors, checking rooms and searching for familiar faces. He stopped outside doors, listening for sounds, but heard nothing. The occasional gust of wind through the halls only heightened his unease. Then, after several minutes of fruitless searching, he noticed a door slightly ajar on the top floor, a usually quiet area with fewer patients. Approaching cautiously, Ethan peeked inside. What he saw shattered him. Alicia was there, sitting at a table with the same man he had seen at the hospital before. The tall, muscular man who looked like he belonged in an action movie. The man was wearing a lab coat and laughing, and Alicia was laughing with him. But the way they looked at each other was completely different from how she had ever looked at Ethan. There was an intimacy between them that was undeniable. It was more than just friendship or professional camaraderie. Ethan saw their hands brush against each other, their gazes lingering with a romantic undertone that left no room for doubt. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes. The pain was unbearable, as if a knife had been driven through his heart. He wanted to scream but remained silent. Every moment in that room felt like an eternity. He couldn't accept that his life and his relationship with Alicia had been built on lies. His heart broke, and he didn't know how to process this new reality. Ethan walked back to his car, barely holding back tears. The emptiness and betrayal overwhelmed him. Sitting behind the wheel, he drove home, but he was no longer the same Ethan who had left a few hours earlier, still hoping things could be fixed. He now knew he couldn't stay in this relationship, but it pained him to admit it. Back at home, Ethan sat in the dark, feeling the weight of his broken heart. Thoughts of revenge swirled in his mind, ways to reclaim his dignity and make Alicia pay for her betrayal. He decided on a plan. Ethan would pretend everything was fine, play along with Alicia's game, and wait for the right moment to expose her. He wanted her to feel the pain of betrayal, to experience what it was like to stand in his shoes. In the following days, Ethan meticulously planned his next steps. He learned more about Alicia's routines, her hospital colleagues, and the man she had been seeing. Slowly but methodically, Ethan began gathering evidence. He spent his days preparing for the inevitable confrontation, studying Alicia's interactions and movements. While she remained unaware of his intentions, Ethan was piecing together the truth and setting the stage for her downfall. Early one morning, Ethan woke up, the crisp air filling the room. His thoughts, however, remained dark. From the moment he learned of Alicia's betrayal, his life had changed. He no longer slept or ate properly, but the worst part was that he no longer felt anything for her except deep-seated betrayal and pain. That morning, Ethan put on simple clothes to avoid drawing attention and made his way back to the hospital. He was determined to dismantle the world Alicia had built, her career, her reputation, and the life she had hidden from him. With weeks of preparation behind him, Ethan entered the hospital with a clear strategy. He knew who Alicia spent time with, who she confided in, and which colleagues were closest to her. Ethan's approach was subtle but effective. He began planting doubts among her coworkers, subtly hinting at inappropriate relationships. He left anonymous messages that pointed fingers at her involvement with the man who had been her lover. Ethan's plan wasn't impulsive. It was calculated, designed to unravel her carefully constructed image. With every step he took, Ethan knew he was moving closer to the moment of confrontation, a moment that would forever redefine their lives. Ethan managed to access the hospital's computer system and, through a series of manipulations, gathered the necessary documents. He found several cases where Alicia had violated professional norms. She had sent patients for tests during unauthorized hours, given unfounded advice, and even offered consultations outside the hospital, which could jeopardize the clinic's reputation. Ethan meticulously collected all these documents, and now he was ready to make his move. Meanwhile, Alicia continued living her life, believing that everything that had happened was in the past. She didn't suspect that her betrayed husband now had everything he needed to end her career. Ethan decided to send these documents to the hospital administration. He ensured they reached the right people, senior medical staff and representatives of the ethics department. These violations were clear and undeniable, and it soon became evident that Alicia would have a hard time avoiding the consequences. The next day, Alicia received a call from the hospital administration. She was informed that her behavior was under investigation and that some of her actions had led to violations of ethical standards. Only when she heard these words did she start to panic. She realized that this could have serious consequences and that her career in the medical field could be ruined. Ethan felt no regret. He understood that this was how it had to be. It was the only way for her to feel the pain of betrayal and see her world fall apart. While Alicia was consumed by her anxieties, Ethan was already prepared for the next step. He sent her a message. "You've lost everything. I'm no longer with you. But now you'll understand what it means to betray someone who loves you. You were foolish, and now everything will go to hell." Alicia was shocked when she saw the message. At first, she couldn't believe her eyes. But when the information about the hospital investigation reached her, she realized it was Ethan who had done this. She had no choice. She tried to turn to her colleagues and find a way to justify her actions, but it was too late. Her reputation was destroyed, and the hospital was forced to suspend her from work. Alicia lost her dream job and was left with the anonymous man. Ethan, on the other hand, was satisfied that he had exacted his revenge. If an anonymous person called you and said your wife was cheating, would you believe them?